Welcome back to this new episode of the Computational Antitrust podcast. My name is Thibaut Schrepel. I am a faculty affiliate at Stanford University Codex Center, an associate professor of law at the VU Amsterdam, and the creator of the Computational Antitrust project, which explores how legal informatics can benefit antitrust law.
I am Teodora Groza. I am a PhD student in competition law at Sciences Po and also a research fellow for the Track AI project, an initiative co-hosted by Sciences Po and Codex, sponsored by Project Liberty Institute.
Today's guest is Mahmoud Momtaz, president of the Egyptian Competition Authority, who he has been leading since 2021.
In today's episode, we'll talk about the enforcement priorities of global south jurisdiction, how computational tools have been implemented in Egypt, but also what challenges this authority has faced in implementing computational tools. We also talk about, incidentally, the goals of competition policy and its relationship with industrial policy. Stay tuned for our interesting conversation.
Mahmoud, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Theodora and I are absolutely delighted to have you as a guest. What we have done is that we have divided the conversation in two different parts. First, we thought it would be appropriate to get to know your agency better.
Sure.
And ask about your priorities and how they have changed in recent years and the challenges that you see facing the agency. And then we want to, of course, talk about computational antitrust. But for now, tackling the very first question that we have, we indeed wondered what are the biggest challenges that Egypt is facing today.
Perfect. Thank you, Thibaut. Thank you, Theodora, for having me. It's a pleasure. Again, so I think Egypt is similar to all other developing countries facing the same challenges. And I would say now with the digital markets and digital economy, even developed countries. So I think all of competition agencies around the world do have the same interests and same challenges. It would differ where exactly you would put these challenges in your priorities, but I think we all face the same thing. So to give you an essence, I think our priorities right now is basically all the agency matters that has to do with, for example, talking about food sector, healthcare, and education. So these were the markets where the masses are and the products that affects the public or the general public, if I may say so. And that would do with all the inputs of it in terms of if it's on digital platforms or it's on conventional platform, brick and mortar shops and so on. And that's basically the main priorities that we have right now. It's whatever affect people, especially, as you may know, in recent years, the inflation spiked up, and we want to make sure that people are getting the right pricing of these products according to normal supply and demand economic principles.
How big was the inflation in Egypt compared to other part of the world?
It was double digit, I would say. It's we went up last year above 30, so it was quite significant. So that's why we always say competition agencies do have a role in these circumstances to make sure that the inflation is inflation generated due to economic turbulences or economic circumstances, but not due to anti-competitive practices. So that's basically what we always look into. And also, on the other hand side, to make sure that public spending and public expenditure through procurement are made in a more efficient way and more competitive manner, which also would give a leeway to the government and their budget to provide social safety nets and so on. So I think this is an important role that we look into from an anti-competitive standpoint, but also from if I would say competitive neutrality standpoint, to make sure that also the government in these circumstances does not take any anti-governmental state measures that might affect these markets in these situations and make things worse. Because you always see in these economic situations, different countries do take different measures, either more protectionism for investment or more openness to make sure that you get products from abroad to play a little bit supply and demand game. But that's where you as a competition agency, at least Egypt as a competition agency, we look into this also, how the government and the governmental decisions affect these dynamics.
Yeah, I think too little competition agencies are doing exactly that, and that's crucial.
So based on your answer, I gather that your authority focuses most on the industries which are closest to the people, as in essential goods. But in the EU and the US, the talk of the town is always digital markets. To get to know a bit what you do in that sector, can you tell us where this ranks in your enforcement priorities and how exactly are you tackling digital markets?
Sure. As I mentioned, whenever digital markets come as a topic within these markets, we always look into it. To give you an essence, we looked into food delivery platforms back in 2 years ago. So we've looked into other, what we say, sending boxes through platforms and so on, or freight forwarding matters that has to do with the value chain of the digital platforms. Also, we looked into that from different perspectives. But in terms of a general policy, I would say two dynamics in our strategy. One is to look into it in terms of how these digital markets could be formed or could be developed in terms of access to markets. So that's one. And this is fill in with our main role when I talked about competitive neutrality and competition policy, when we're working hand in hand with the government to make sure that these policies are enabling private sector and especially entrepreneurs, small and medium enterprises. So on one thing, so market access. Second is to make sure that the current regulations within markets are not discriminating between maybe old players and new players entering the market. So that's another thing. And thirdly would be the anti-competitive practice. And we always ask ourselves the same question: are the regulation or the current regulation is enough to tackle these issues? And in our answer to this question, so far, yes, in our mandate, although we treat it in terms of enforcement. If we need more, of course we need more, and that's where we work very closely with our counterparts. To give you an example, we do have Egypt and other African countries developed what we call the African Heads Dialogue on Digital Markets. The aim of it is to make sure that our policies and our enforcement activities also fills in the gap within the continent. That's also helping with regional blocks coming into play, such as COMESA Competition Commission, such as the African Continental Free Trade Area. That's why it's very important that competition agencies within the same continent to have this dynamics. That's on the African side. On the Arab side, we do have what we call the Arab Competition Network. And this is a network that we developed Egypt with our fellow Arab competition authorities to make sure also to look into all matters of enforcement. But in particular, I would say digital was one of the topics. And I think Thibaut was invited to last year's annual conference. And that's for us, it's a very important matter that we're not closed in terms of how we look into things. We are open to learn more of how people have developed their networks. We do have the ECN, the European Competition Network, that have been there for quite some time. But still, I would think our competition network is doing very well in terms of how to streamline our efforts and our capabilities with the different working groups. I'm sorry for being a little bit long on this, but this is how we look into enforcement from a regional, international cooperation standpoint, locally, how we focused on it in terms of our priorities, and also in terms of competitive neutrality and competition policy in general.
It's always great to hear about competition authorities collaborating and exchanging good practices, because that's the core of our project. So that very much plays in our favor. I just want to push you a bit more on your answer to my previous question. Would you say that there's a bit of an industrial policy angle to your digital market strategy, given that you're trying to encourage market access by local?
It's always an interplay between industrial policy and competition policy. You cannot leave one of them outside of the box. I think it's how you deal with industrial policy and competition policy together is very important. In my point of view, what we're doing is to make sure that competition is more than looking into anti-competitive practice per se. And this also has to do with I would say the historical question: what is the objective of a competition law and authority? I think in Egypt, we didn't say that it's only or primarily consumer welfare. I would say we took what we say the ordoliberal school to make sure that markets work. And that's give you a little bit an answer to your question. It depends on the objective. And from our side, our objective is not primarily only consumer welfare. And that's why sometimes we look into medium and long-term policies or pro-competitive policies that would make competition better in the future.
I see. So we're tackling already quite a bit of thorny subjects, from the goals of competition policy, which is an endless debate, to competition policy, industrial policy, another endless debate. I want to move on to the debate of the moment, which is how we regulate AI. So in Europe, we have the AI Act, which is a sector-specific regulation, but we have also other instruments elsewhere, which are more soft, open-ended principles that are supposed to be observed by all agencies, competition agencies, data protection agencies, and so on. What do you think would be the best strategy for Egypt? And do you think competition policy will have a role to play in how the AI industry will look like in your jurisdiction?
Definitely, there would be a close collaboration with the Ministry of Telecommunication, which is the ministry handling the AI strategy, Egyptian strategy. And there is a full-blown strategy on AI that Egypt have taken into account. The question would be always, are the current regulations are enough to make sure that you properly govern and I would say protect new entrants and the current players in the market? It's a long question that to give you an answer in this podcast, but I think this is where we all struggle. I think we are all learning, and still things are in the beginnings of it. I would say how these matters, and even yesterday we looked into the new DeepSeek stock market and how things went in a different direction when the Chinese came in with their new AI technology and so on. So still, I think markets are developing. I would say I don't want to take, as we may say in competition terminology, type 1 error over enforcement. And I would rather look and see how things would go in order not to hinder innovation in this, on the short term, which could benefit the markets on the long term.
If you take the market capitalization that Nvidia lost just yesterday, which is about $600 billion US, that is more than the market cap of Boeing plus Bank of America. So that shows how dynamic competition is brutal and impacting the market. Now, to try to combine all of that, so we talked about industrial policy AI and how the agency is cooperating with others. Which role do you think the Egyptian Competition Authority is playing both regionally and internationally? In terms of leadership, how are you positioning your agency, and where do you wish to take the whole group of agencies we've been mentioning so far?
As I mentioned, Egypt specifically, in terms of its geography, it's located in a position where you can try to look into different patterns. So one, you can see on the Arab side, this is one role that we play. On the African side, this is another role that we play. And even the Euro-Mediterranean side. So as you may know, this is also South Mediterranean, North-South Mediterranean agreements and so on. So this is where I think it's very important that what we seek is to make sure that there is enough cooperation and collaboration to stop, or at least do have a proactive competition policy role when it comes to cross-border anti-competitive practices. And by definition, all of these, I would say, cases of digital markets and so on, they are definitely by nature cross-border. And that's why I think when I mentioned the African heads dialogue on digital markets, is what the beginning of it was for that purpose specifically. That I think it's very important to collaborate, to learn from each other. And that's why, in terms of the African side, or the Arab Competition Network on the Arab side, or even our bilateral protocol with Greece, Cyprus, and all the other European countries on the other side, is very important to make sure that we learn from the different subjects. And I remember very well with my fellow colleague Ioannis, when he was heading the Greek competition agency, when he did this sandbox and he did different things on digital markets and so on. This is very important. To learn new things and new talents. And to give you also another example, when we worked on the African Confederation football case, was broadcasting. It was a broadcasting case that affected almost all African countries at the time. And then the COMESA Competition Commission came after and came with their case against CAF. That gave you an essence that It's the same thing that you face other competition authorities in other countries face, and that's why it's very important to learn from each other. Also, to give you a clear example, in the food delivery markets, Kuwait had the case against Delivery Hero. Egypt had the same case, and so other countries do have open investigations on these cases. So that shows us that digital markets, by nature, the same behavior could be happening on different sides of the continent or different sides on the same on different continent even. So that's why I would say in brief that collaboration and cooperation among competition authority is crucial, especially in digital markets.
Yeah. So in a sense, you are facing common issues, which totally justify looking at those from a global perspective. Now, I was told that you introduced a new competition regime in Egypt. Can you give us an overview of what it entails? And again, yes, this is an impossible question in just a couple of minutes, but what are the big trends and principles that comes out of it?
So we already passed an amendment 2 years ago, which was the pre-merger control regime. I think now we're moving also into a new amendment to our law to enhance the powers of ECA and also to enhance the I would say the sanctioning powers of ECA. And that's the main, I would say, these are at this point the main headlines of these amendments. Of course, there's a lot of details in terms of the violation and so on, but I don't want to say a lot on that at this point until the Parliament do have their thorough discussion and of what stakeholders would believe are okay and so on. So yeah, that's the aim. So the first amendment is basically to enhance the ex-ante merger regime. And that was crucial, especially when I've mentioned inflation, I mentioned currency devaluation. In these times, acquisitions do happen a lot. And this is what we anticipated, is what we got. Accordingly, you needed to have more powers in terms of ex-ante powers. And here we also learned from our cases, even in digital markets, by the way, when we included what we called the material influence. So we didn't only put only control, but we also included material influence because we had the case before when we had also, it was Delivery Hero and Glovo, the Spanish company, do had an agreement. Delivery Hero owned around 16% of Glovo, and they had like a veto right or something in their contract that gives the power to stop any rounds of investment or expansion to Glovo. And then there was this round of investment that Glovo wanted to go through with, and Delivery Hero stopped it using this clause. Although it had only at the time 16% of Glovo, it had the power to stop such an investment and so on. And was the request at the time was to Glovo to exit the Egyptian market and another market in Latin America. So here we went through with this case as a violation. And this is where it was a learning process that when we designed also our pre-merger notification regime, that we looked into including not only control, but also material influence, such was similar to the UK.
So lots of developments happening in this space already and lots of concrete effects. But now to move on to part 2 of our conversation, I want to start zooming in on computational antitrust, unsurprisingly. So your agency has started adopting computational tools under your leadership, and I was wondering what motivated you to do so. Was it the fact that you had staff shortages? Did you want to be able to take on more cases? Was it something completely different? What exactly prompted you to start pushing towards computational tools?
I think it's all of the above. It's of course resources is when you look into computational antitrust. It helps you on different fronts, especially with the human resources. That this would help us a lot, and that's why we pushed through having a department which is called the Economic Intelligence Department, and this department is basically specialized into looking into data and grabbing data from markets, secondary sources, and so on, and developing tools to facilitate the work of the investigative teams. So it's a sort of the first, I would say, market monitoring of suspicious behavior. And this has to do with, for example, a web scraping tool that we developed in ECA that grabs data from different supermarkets and gives us price trends on how things are going. And then on the other hand side, we do have, for example, data on the inputs of these products, and that gives us the leverage to understand how these movement in prices are there due to normal circumstances, cost, and so on, or is due to any abnormal behavior that might be an anti-competitive practice. And then this department sends this file, in that case, to the investigative department that starts working on this investigation. That helped a lot. And also currently working on two different tools using AI that would help us in competitive neutrality, especially, and also the competition enforcement. Still in the making, but I think it's going to be developed very soon.
As you mentioned, the creation of the Economic Intelligence Departments was part of the 2021 to 2025 strategy of the ACA.
Yes.
Now, focusing on the positive for now, where has the department met or exceeded your expectations? If there are any good stories you like to share, I think now is the time.
No, I think it's having a dedicated team and using data scientists to look into these matters in itself was very helpful to ECA. It helped into identifying cases. It helped into having a better view of markets. And it helped us also into advising a government on different matters. To give you an example, when you have a full database on, for example, pharmaceuticals, or you have a full database on the healthcare and the locations of these hospitals. So whenever you're getting a merger today, and you need to understand for which geographical area that you need to look into. And as you may know, you have this method of putting a radius for the emergency cases and so on. Now it's becoming easier and faster for us to provide these feedbacks and so on. To give you accurate numbers, the average days that we take now for a merger and acquisition to reply on it, most of them were clearance without conditions. Only one case was a clearance with condition. In the past 6 months, the average of days that we spent, it's around 16 days. From the day we had a full filing to the day that we have a decision. And in my point of view, that was due to the proper preparedness of the data and proper databases that we built throughout the years due to this department and other departments within ECA.
How many mergers are you dealing with on a yearly basis?
To give you, I think the last 6 months, I would say above 55, around that number. But also we had another mandate that we're looking into healthcare sector specifically. So any transaction that happens in the healthcare, even if it's below the threshold, we look into it.
Yeah.
And that's what around 400 cases.
Yeah, and you have no choice but to take on those cases, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's part of our advisory role in that case.
So as the merger control story shows, you have plenty of good stories to share. But now I'm going to play bad cop and ask, do you have any bad stories? Are there any aspects where it was much harder than you expected to implement computational tools? Anything you can share with us?
Definitely. There is a lot. And again, these things are expensive to do. It requires a lot of proper investment that you put upfront without knowing exactly how you get things at the end. So also sometimes we had tools that we tried to develop and at the end of the day didn't work out. So you have to accept a little bit that sometimes you might fail, but also I think it was, if I looked into the overall investment cost and the overall output at the end of the day, of course, it's worth it. And again, the most important thing, it has to do with investigation or intelligence department or anything, how to get the proper human resource. It's very hard, especially in Egypt, I would say. It's not, people are not trained on competition. Competition is not a common subject in the law faculties or economics. We talk about industrial organization and so on. Although I think do have a very good onboarding methods for new people that comes into ECA, but it's very hard to find the proper person that you really need. To give you a concrete example, the last phase we wanted to recruit, I would say around 30 new employees at the agency, and we got around 400 applications. From the 400 application, we accepted around 4. So this because we do have a very rigorous, I would say, acceptance in terms of passing different types of exams and so on. So that gives you an essence when you look for the right caliber, it's not easy. And it gets harder when you go into computational tools. And that's where you get a little bit of a step back moving forward in this part. But again, I think it was very helpful also that we work closely with different universities. Lately, we signed an MOU with George Washington University. A colleague of ours now, she's in Washington as a fellow to work on competition policy matter and so on. So this is how we also try to enhance our employees' capacity building in that sense.
I have two follow-up questions. The first is, how big is the agency? And the second one is, who are you competing with in terms of attracting talents?
How big is the agency now? We're around 120. We're competing with everyone. I think we're competing with the private sector, definitely. And the problem is with competing with the private sector, especially when we talk about lawyers. When you look into law firms, it's definitely there is a huge pay gap, especially when you go up the ladder, when you go into a middle management. So this is a first and major competitor to us, especially now with the new merger control regime and so on. More demand have been there for our employees, also other governmental agencies, especially for our economists. Of course, the central bank and other data-driven agencies within the government. And again, even international organizations. So I would say different employees of ours have left for jobs abroad in international organizations. And that's, for us, we don't see it as a negative thing, to be very frank, even when we look into law firms. Because for us, this is expanding the knowledge and the culture of competition. And that helps our work in the future. And again, I always do believe that this place, I would say, it's a place that can definitely assist and help in developing competition culture in markets. And part of this competition culture, we like it or not, is our people leaving us and going to other jobs within the market.
I see. So you have quite some challenges when it comes to finding the right people. And I gather you're still hiring since you only found 4 people, but we're looking for 30. So maybe someone who's listening right now could be tempted to give it a shot. But to switch on from people to tools, we see that agencies around the world are deploying computational tools, but this process of adopting and deploying them is not one size fits all, meaning that there are different challenges in different jurisdictions. Could you tell us a bit more about what specific challenges has your authority faced and why is that the case?
Again, as I mentioned, these tools do need a lot of financing in the beginning. And it's always a question of budget and priorities. So which project do you want to start first? And do you have the budget for it or not? And that's how I think we put our strategy in that sense, to make sure that we have the right financing to get the proper tools, as you've mentioned. And sometimes we opt to develop our own tools in-house, as we did with the price scrapping tool, to overcome this challenge. And I think so far we've been successful in doing so.
And who is voting your budget? And do you feel like computational antitrust could be a good story, actually, to justify why you may need to increase the budget?
Definitely, it's a story that we use every day. And I would say today, for example, I was at the Ministry of Finance asking for the budget for next year, and then afterwards we'll go to the Parliament for that. And part of the discussion was also getting the computational tools and what is the plan and the budget for next year. As I mentioned, we do have very two interesting and promising projects that includes AI, and that would need quite significant funding to make this happen. And I think we're going the financing for these projects in the right direction.
So if I ask about the medium to long term, so not just looking at next year, because I clearly understand you need that to justify the budget, but let's say 5 to 10 years from now, how ideally, which we know won't happen because that's an ideal world, but still, ideally, how do you see the ACA working and implementing tools?
Yeah, because when we discussed, for example, today, it was not for next year only, it was for the up to 3 years. But as you've mentioned, if we're looking into 10 years, definitely it's a different animal. I cannot imagine, but things are going very rapidly. I think when I started looking into competition 20 years ago, it was a pretty different world. It was the major cases where I think Kodak in the aftermarket of cartridges, of printers, and so on. Now it's a little bit going in a different direction, and that's why I think competition agencies need to develop, because also anti-competitive practicing are developing very fast. And as you may know, algorithms and things that has to do with pricing and price signaling and so on, you need to develop tools very well. And also, you cannot hire people endless. So you need to get the proper tools to make this, to strike the balance between the number of resources that you need and the things that also tools could also help you in taking this. So to answer your question directly, definitely in 10 years, I can imagine computational tools are taking a much greater role in our agency. That means that also different types of employees going to be included in our hierarchy, and different types of departments needs to be looked at. And this is currently what we're doing in developing our new 5-year strategy.
I think Thibaut and I can totally agree with you that we share the vision that computational tools will take off in the near future, and we cannot wait to see what you're going to do in that space. But now, because the discussion went so well and your answers were so insightful, we have 2 bonus questions. And I'm going to start with a personal one. You mentioned a bit earlier that it's not common for law students in Egypt to study competition law, but that you chose this career 20 years ago. Can you tell us why, and what has prompted you to choose to dedicate your life to competition policy?
Interesting enough, I didn't know about competition policy. I just knew that there's a new agency after I graduated from school. I graduated with an economics background, and I've heard that there's this new agency that looks into competition. I had no idea, to be very frank, of what is competition law, what anything would have to do with this. But actually, when I went to the interview, it was a very interesting place to look at things. People that do have a very ambitious goals, that wants to serve the public and do good. And I think this, from there, it was, you can see that you find your place in the right direction, what you want to do with your life. And actually, this has pushed me to actually afterwards to study law, and afterwards also to do my PhD in law and competition law and economics. So it was, I think, to give you a clear answer, at the time where I was in university, I definitely didn't know about competition law or competition agencies. I just learned that, yeah, there's this antitrust law that looks into merger and control and anti-competitive practices, but how this would really do and have a positive effect on markets, it was not clear to me. And this all happened when I joined ECA at the time. So currently, what we're trying is, I don't want young students to go through the same path, and to make sure that they do know all their options at the time where they're at school. So currently, we're working with the Ministry of Education to include principles of competition law in the curricula of even school students, to give them the essence of choice and so on. And we are working closely with the Ministry of Higher Education to include competition law. Now, currently, I would say it's have been included in different universities, some of them as an elective course, some as a mandatory course, but they've been included, and we're working closely with them to be included much more. That's to give, I would say, 10 to 20 years, we'll find people that do understand pretty well what competition law is about, how they can benefit from it. And if they do want to join ECA at that time, that also would be a very, I would say, positive thing also.
Yeah, I was thinking, let's not wait for the university. The school is actually big enough. My son is 2.5, and that's good enough. That's the time for competition law to be introduced. All right, one final question from you to the agency. What is the one thing you wish everybody would know about the Egyptian Competition Authority?
That's a hard question. The rest wasn't easy to answer, but I would think what is, I would like people to know about this authority. I would say that we're, again, an authority that's there to help from different perspectives. from even perspective of even help companies to understand how to comply with the law and how to do the right thing. And also we're there with the people that have been having problems and having issues due to anti-competitive practices, also another thing. And again, for other agencies across the region, I would say ECA is there also to help. Currently, we do have the UNCTAD Regional Training Center for Middle East and Africa, and we did quite some trainings in the center. We're looking forward, maybe next time we include training on computational antitrust at the time, and that I think it's something that we also really looking forward to enhance the capacity building of the African continent and the Arab region simultaneously on that. And that's, I would say, all what I would like people to understand, that we're open for new ideas and we're there whenever people need us.
Yep. Yep. I love that. And I know Theodora does too. A lot of what we've been pushing is we tend to see competition law, and I think that's also the way we teach it, as a confrontational matter. It's the state versus the companies, but it may also be that competition agencies want to help companies because guess what? Most of them are not in the business of infringing competition law, and they will be very pleased to be compliant. So it's very good to hear that you are doing that. And on that very good note, I think it's the time to end the conversation. Thank you so very much. I've learned a lot, and I'm confident that people listening to us did as well. And on that, to everyone out there, take care of yourself, and if you can, someone else too. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Thibaut. Thank you, Theodora. It was a pleasure. And looking forward to more in the future. Thank you.